All right, so I'm going to walk you through some aspects of a bedside swallow valve. I am at home. As you can see, my dog is asleep over here on the sofa. My kids will probably interrupt. So let me introduce the components. First of all, we have our thicket here, and there's lots of different brands of thickening agents. This is just the one that's available at Walgreens, and it's the big container of it. So there are like the brand names. Uh, this is just the generic one. Also, when you're laying out and getting everything ready for your bedside swallow valve, you really want to come up with a system for how you do it so that everything is always kept straight. One thing that I always picked up on was for your thin liquids. As I said in the lecture, that straw on the thin liquid is sort of the top of the top of the ladder, the most difficult part of the liquid portion of your swallow valve. So I go ahead and put the straw in the thin liquid. And then I have my honey and my thick, and go ahead and put a spoon in each, and you want each to have a separate spoon so that you don't finish with your honey and then be trying to get the honey thick off of the honey thick spoon so that you can move to the nectar thick. Also, let's talk about mixing the stuff up some. So this is my thin liquid. I don't have to mix that, so I'm going to put that over here. When you're going into your eval, understand that the more fluid you have in your cup, the more thickening agent is going to be required to thicken that up. Also, understand that the more water you have in here that you have to thicken, the more thickening agent that it's going to require. So if you have filled the cup all the way up to here, you're probably not going to have a lot of room left to start piling in all the thickener to make it as thick as you want. So on the honey and the nectar, you tend to start with less amounts of that in the cup because you're probably going to be giving most of these by teaspoon, and it's not going to be that much volume. When you go to your thin liquids, you want to have it more full, because if you make it that far, you're really going to want to be pushing them to see what they can do, and you don't have to thicken it up, so you can use that space in the cup. All right, so I'm going to start with trying to get a honey thick consistency. I'm having to put my hand down in the powder because this was buried. This is this is the container that I use for class. So it's probably not in too good a shape. All right, so I'm going to put 1 cup full there. And there is like a ratio, there is a scientific way of doing this. But once you get it down to a certain point, like I never look at the ratios, and I never have. And also, it takes the thickener a few minutes to really thicken up to where it's going to stay at. So you want to put some in there, and you want to wait and give it time. Usually when we do this in class, the students will immediately put 1 scoop in there, and they're like, oh, it's not thick enough, and they'll put another scoop in there. And then like 5 minutes later, it's basically just like cement almost. All right, so this is looking pretty thick. As you can see, it's sort of globby. A couple of this is about honey thick, maybe a little tad on the thick side. 2 characteristics that you look for when you're mixing honey thick is that when you drop some on the top, then the surface of the honey thick holds that dimple where where your drop hit it. And also, if it's honey thick, it's not going to splash. Honey thick doesn't really splash. Let me put a little bit more thin in here. Loosen it up a little bit. Okay, that's looking better. It's more like a honey thick. It was getting to be more of a pudding consistency. So you can sort of see that consistency. So it's hitting, it's not really splashing. And when that drop hits the top of the surface of the fluid, it sort of makes a little dimple, and that dimple stays. If the dimple doesn't stay, and if they're splashing, you're probably more in the realm of nectar thick. All right, so I've got my honey thick. Let me move to trying to get some nectar thick going. It is more within, it's not quite within the realm of normal consistency, but it's not that far out either. So like I said, you should be able to tell that nectar thick is thick, but also it still has some splash to it. And you gotta be more careful when you're going for a nectar thick. You can't just dump a bunch of stuff in there. So I don't know if y'all can see this, but you can tell as that rolls off the spoon, it's not really a normal thin consistency. But it's not wholly abnormal. And when I drop the liquid into the cup like this, it doesn't form a dimple on the top of the surface. The top of the surface stays flat, but there is that sort of sense of globbiness as it rolls off the spoon. I got some in my eye. So we got our honey thick. Let me check on it. It's getting really thick. Put a little bit more thin in there. So we have our honey thick, our nectar thick, our thin. Now ideally, I would have a cup of applesauce, a piece of a banana that I would get from the cafeteria, and I would have some crackers, and this would cover most of my bases. This would be sort of my most basic bedside swallow evaluation, what I would start with.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're going to start with the honey thick liquid, a half teaspoon. And here you go. Swallow when you're ready. And you can feel a normal hyolaryngeal excursion. So how'd that go?
Normal, more or less.
Normal, more or less. All right, do this for me. Say ah.
Ah.
All right, let me hear you cough. All right, so I don't hear any wetness on the vocal folds. On the ah, I don't hear anything rattling around during her cough. So I'm going to go for another teaspoon of honey thick. Go ahead, swallow when you're ready. Normal hyolaryngeal excursion. How'd that go?
Normal.
Normal. Okay. And I'll probably pretend like I'm taking notes or something. I'll look away. I'll give them some time to clear their throat and start coughing if that is something they're going to do. And you want to give, especially with the honey and the nectar thick, you want to give that some time to that stasis, some time to start traveling down towards the airway to cue the cough. And I'll say, okay, do this for me. Say ah.
Ah.
And hear cough. All right, that was good. Now moving to the honey thick from the cup rim. Take a sip, however much is normal for you. All right, how'd that go?
Normal.
Normal? All right. Say ah. Let me hear you cough. All right. That sounds good. So I'm not hearing any wetness on our vocal folds. I'm not hearing any rattling around on the vocal folds during the cough as well. So we're going to go to the nectar thick. There you go. All right, how'd that go down?
Good.
Yeah. All right, do this for me. Say ah.
Ah.
All right, I'm hearing cough. All right, all sounds normal. All right, same thing. Here you go. How'd that go?
Normal.
Normal. All right. Say ah.
Ah.
All right, let me hear you cough. All right. Everything seems to be going good. You go take a sip of the nectar thick as you normally would. Mm-hmm. How'd that go?
Normal.
All right. Let me hear you cough. All right. Say ah.
Ah.
All right. Moving to the thin liquid. All right. A little teaspoon of thin liquid. Hold on. Don't swallow it yet. My hand. All right. Go ahead. All right. How'd that go?
Normal.
Normal. All right. Do this for me. Say ah.
Ah.
All right. Let me hear you cough. Mm-hmm. All right. It's the same thing. Teaspoon of thin liquid. All right. How'd that go?
Normal.
Normal. All right. Let me hear you cough. All right. Now, thin liquid, take a couple sips of that back to back. All right. Now, put the cup up and take 2 swallows without lowering it. All right. You just kill it. That's good enough. All right. Thank you for being the model. And from there, normally we would go to testing the thin liquids with the straw. But since I don't have any more water in here, I'm not going to do that. All right, thank you, Brown. So that's sort of just a quick overview of what the protocol, what the pacing of a bedside swallow eval tends to look like. That was a pretty quick one. Another important note, with the thickened liquids, you can't pour these down the drain. They'll stop things up. So your thickened liquids that you mix up have to go in the trash.